In our series on the CIA's secret history, we've seen the agency fight proxy wars, topple governments, and even assassinate its own allies. But what if the CIA's greatest victory was also its most catastrophic failure? What if the operation that brought the Soviet Union to its knees also gave birth to the very enemy that would attack America on September 11th? This is the story of the Soviet-Afghan War, the CIA's longest and most expensive covert operation, a war that would have consequences far beyond anyone's imagination. This is the story of Operation Cyclone, the CIA's secret war in Afghanistan. It's the story of how the agency, in its single-minded pursuit of defeating the Soviet Union, armed and trained a generation of Islamic holy warriors, including a young Saudi millionaire named Osama bin Laden. Using Tim Weiner's Legacy of Ashes and declassified government records, we will reveal how the CIA, in its quest to give the Soviets their own Vietnam, created a global jihadist movement that would one day turn its guns on the United States. This is the story of how the road to 9/11 began in the mountains of Afghanistan. By the end of this video, you will understand that the war on terror was not a new conflict, but the direct, unintended consequence of the CIA's last great victory in the Cold War. If you believe that understanding these hidden histories is essential to understanding our world, then support our mission. Like this video and subscribe to Strategy Codex. Your support allows us to continue this critical work. Our story begins in 1979, a year of crisis for the United States. The Shah of Iran, America's key ally in the Persian Gulf, had been overthrown. The American embassy in Tehran was under siege, and in Afghanistan, a fragile pro-Soviet government was on the verge of collapse. The geriatric leaders in the Kremlin, led by Leonid Brezhnev, looked south with fear. They saw the flames of Islamic fundamentalism burning towards their borders, threatening the stability of their own Muslim republics in Central Asia. The Soviet intelligence chief, Yuri Andropov, declared, "We cannot lose Afghanistan." For months, the CIA watched as the Soviets massed troops on the Afghan border. But the agency, still reeling from the scandals of the 1970s and led by the cautious Admiral Stansfield Turner, failed to predict the Kremlin's intentions. The CIA's top-secret reports to the White House confidently stated that the Soviets would be most reluctant to introduce large numbers of ground forces into Afghanistan. They were wrong. On Christmas Eve, 1979, the Red Army invaded. It was a brutal, swift takeover. Soviet special forces stormed the presidential palace in Kabul, killing the Afghan president and installing their own puppet. The Soviet Union now controlled Afghanistan. For President Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, the Soviet invasion was both a crisis and an opportunity. A Polish émigré who harbored a deep-seated hatred of the Soviet Union, Brzezinski saw a chance to give the Soviets their own Vietnam, a bloody and unwinnable quagmire that would drain their resources and morale. Just days after the invasion, wrote a memo to President Carter. "We now have the opportunity of giving to the USSR its Vietnam War." The plan was simple. The CIA would arm and fund the Afghan resistance, the Mujahedin, and turn Afghanistan into a death trap for the Red Army. This was the birth of Operation Cyclone, the largest and most expensive covert operation in the CIA's history. Over the next decade, the CIA would funnel billions of dollars in weapons and cash to the Mujahedin, but the agency was not acting alone. The operation was a partnership with Pakistan's intelligence service, the ISI. The CIA would provide the money and the weapons. The ISI would handle the training and distribution to the Afghan fighters. This arrangement gave the CIA plausible deniability, but it also meant that the agency had little control over who received the weapons. The ISI, under the hardline Islamist General Zia-ul-Haq, favored the most extreme and fanatical of the Mujahideen groups. They believed that these were the most effective fighters, and they also shared their radical Islamic ideology. In the early years of the war, The CIA's support was limited. They provided the Mujahedin with old Soviet-made weapons, like the AK-47, so that the aid could not be traced back to the United States. But the Mujahedin, though brave, were outgunned. The Soviet army, with its tanks, artillery, and helicopter gunships, controlled the cities and the main roads. The Mujahedin were confined to the mountains, fighting a desperate hit-and-run war. Everything changed in 1985 when Ronald Reagan came to power. Reagan, a fervent anti-communist, was determined to roll back the Soviet Empire, not just contain it. He appointed his friend and campaign manager, William Casey, as Director of Central Intelligence. Casey, a swashbuckling OSS veteran, was a true believer in covert action. He saw the Afghan war as the central front in the global struggle against communism, and he was determined to win it. Under Casey, Operation Cyclone went into overdrive. The budget skyrocketed. The CIA began to provide the Mujahedin with more advanced weaponry, including sniper rifles, anti-tank missiles, and satellite intelligence. But the real game changer came in 1986 with the introduction of the Stinger missile. The Stinger was a shoulder-fired, heat-seeking anti-aircraft missile that could shoot down Soviet helicopters. It was a devastatingly effective weapon. For years, the CIA had resisted providing the Mujahedin with Stingers, fearing that they might fall into the wrong hands and be used against civilian airliners. But Casey, with the backing of a hawkish Texas congressman named Charlie Wilson, pushed the decision through. The arrival of the Stinger missile on the Afghan battlefield was a turning point in the war. Soviet helicopters, which had once ruled the skies, were now falling from the sky in flames. The Red Army was trapped. As the war intensified, a new and dangerous element entered the conflict: the Arab volunteers. Thousands of young Muslim men from across the Middle East flocked to Afghanistan to join the jihad against the godless Soviets. They were inspired by the call to defend a Muslim land from foreign invasion, and they were funded by a network of wealthy donors in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. Among them was a charismatic young Saudi construction heir named Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden arrived in Afghanistan in the mid-1980s. He used his family's fortune to create his own organization, Maktab al-Khidmat, or the Services Bureau. Mak recruited, transported, and trained foreign fighters for the Afghan jihad. Bin Laden worked closely with a Palestinian cleric named Abdullah Azzam, who preached a radical ideology of global jihad. Together, they built a network that would one day become al-Qaeda. The CIA was aware of bin Laden and the Arab volunteers, but they saw them as a sideshow. The agency's focus was on killing Soviets, and they were happy to have anyone who would help. They did not directly fund or arm bin Laden, but they created the conditions in which his organization could flourish. The CIA's money and weapons, funneled through the ISI, flowed to the most extreme factions of the Mujahedin, the very groups that welcomed bin Laden and his foreign fighters. By 1988, the Soviet Union was broken. The war in Afghanistan had become a bloody and expensive stalemate. The new Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, was looking for a way out. In a historic speech at the United Nations, he announced that the Red Army would withdraw from Afghanistan. It was a stunning victory for the United States and the CYA. They had given the Soviets their Vietnam. The Berlin Wall would fall a year later, and the Soviet Union itself would collapse in 1991. The Cold War was over, and the CYA had won. But in the mountains of Afghanistan, the seeds of a new war had been sown. As the Soviets withdrew, a brutal civil war erupted between the various Mujahedin factions. The United States, having achieved its goal of defeating the Soviets, washed its hands of Afghanistan. They cut off the funding and walked away, leaving the country to descend into chaos. It was in this power vacuum that the Taliban, a new and even more extreme Islamic movement, would emerge. And what of Osama bin Laden? He had returned to Saudi Arabia a hero, celebrated for his role in the victory against the Soviets. But he was a changed man. He had seen firsthand how a small group of dedicated holy warriors could defeat a superpower. He believed that he had a divine mission to continue the jihad, not just against the Soviets, but against the other great superpower, the United States. In August 1988, as the Soviets were preparing to withdraw from Afghanistan, bin Laden held a meeting in Peshawar, Pakistan. He and a small group of his followers formally created a new organization dedicated to global jihad. They called it al-Qaeda, the base. The CIA, in its single-minded pursuit of victory in the Cold War, had created a monster. They had armed and trained a generation of Islamic militants, given them a battlefield on which to hone their skills, and provided them with a powerful ideology of global jihad. They had not intended to create al-Qaeda, but they had created the conditions for its birth. The blowback, when it came, would be devastating. Many of the fighters trained by the CIA in Afghanistan would go on to fight in other jihads around the world, from Bosnia to Chechnya. And on September 11, 2001, 19 of them would turn the CIA's own tactics against the United States, hijacking civilian airliners and turning them into weapons of mass destruction. The story of the Soviet-Afghan War is a story of unintended consequences. It is a story of how a secret war, fought for what seemed like the noblest of causes, could have such catastrophic results. The CIA had set out to give the Soviet Union its Vietnam, and they had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. But in doing so, they had also created their own worst nightmare. The road to 9/11 began in the mountains of Afghanistan, in a war that the CIA thought it had won. What do you think about the CIA's strategy in Afghanistan? Was it a brilliant move that helped win the Cold War, or a reckless gamble that created a new and more dangerous enemy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to continue exploring the hidden strategies that have shaped our world, make sure you subscribe to Strategy Codex and hit the notification bell. Our series on the CIA's secret history is almost complete. Subscribe so you don't miss the final chapter, keep questioning, and keep seeking the truth.